From the heartland of America, it's the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolfe. Executive producer, David Stuckman.
Hello and welcome to the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we explore a variety of topics related to bail, pretrial release, and the criminal justice system in the Midwest. My name is Shane Rolfe. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Kansas Bail Agents Association, and I've worked in this field for the past 38 years. Now, one of my favorite quotes of folk wisdom comes from Mark Twain. Quote, "There are three kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics." Now, this phrase swept the Western world in the 1880s and 90s, and several others distilled it down to simple liars, damned liars, and experts. And when you look at a variety of topics, how often do we see, especially in recent history, and almost always in hindsight, that the supposed experts were wrong? For those diehard listeners of the podcast, you'll recall that I did a standalone episode talking about the Illinois Supreme Court's failure to strike down the Safety Act, and most specifically, the portion referred to as the Pretrial Fairness Act, which I believe violates the Illinois Constitution's restrictions on preventive detention and the victims' rights section of the Constitution that mandates that victims be involved in the pretrial release decision process. Unfortunately, the Illinois Supreme Court, in a split decision, disagreed with me. So we are now a year into the actual implementation of the Safety Act, and those who pushed for and supported the wholesale, unaccountable release of pretrial defendants are claiming that it is an unmitigated success and a model for so-called cashless bail for the rest of the country. So are these self-appointed experts correct? For this conversation, we've brought back one of our very first guests on the podcast, Mike Whitlock, who is a national figure in the bail bonding business. He is the Executive Vice President of American Surety and has agents all over the country. Mike, welcome back to the podcast.
Good to be back with you, Shane.
Well, it's been a couple of years since you've been here. Do you have any new titles and accomplishments you need to add to your resume to let us know how great you are?
No new titles, doing the same thing I've always done. We sold control of our company, and we're now a division of core specialty out of Indianapolis. But other than that, doing the same old thing that I've always done.
Well, yeah, I wasn't sure if you were, executive vice president of the new company, or you're still in the American Surety.
Well, I'm still with the American Surety Company, still in the same position, still the same role in the bail division. When you have a big mother company as well, everything's divisions. So we're
Right.
the bail division, and American Surety Company is a division of a core specialty. So, but still, the main thing is I'm just continuing to do everything that I've always done. If I didn't tell you we made a change, you would never know it.
Well, crime numbers have really kind of become political. Now, we saw that at the presidential debate here a couple, 3 weeks ago, where one of the moderators claimed that the FBI says that crime is going down. But the pushback on that was that in 2021, the FBI changed its system for gathering this information, and many large cities are not included in this data yet. And additionally, the FBI data only includes reported crime. So if no police report is made, then no crime occurred, according to the FBI. Do you feel, or has it been your experience and what you've seen from your agents around the country, is crime going down, or are we not having this tremendous drop-off in crime?
Well, I would say the crime is not going down. To your point, the underreporting of crime obviously has a major impact on the crime statistics. And when you look at California, for instance, where they've had so much theft, whether it's retail theft or auto theft, that people just don't even report it anymore. And law enforcement do not even report to the scene when there is a report, because there's just so much of it going on. And those are just not being captured in the statistics. So how can you have real data when you don't encompass all the information? So that is a problem. And as for crime, I think one of the things that we see these days, Shane, I'm sure you can attest, writing bail, is that so many of the people that our bail agents are posting bail for have other cases pending. And because cases are taking so long to prosecute, sometimes up to 2 years and more, the individual that's out on bond or other forms of release or no bond are still committing new crimes, and they're getting arrested for those crimes. And whatever the form of release is used in those areas and those jurisdictions, that's how they're getting out again. So they can have a couple of cases pending and still not even gone to trial on the first case. So that's what we're seeing quite a bit of, which really, in some respects, and maybe in large respects, has led to what the Safety Act has done in Illinois, and other states are trying to pursue in terms of amending their state constitution specific to expanding preventative detention.
Right. Well, and I think you kind of wonder, and I'll get into my own tinfoil theories down the road here, but kind of wonder if that's not really the goal here. If we let everybody go and create chaos, then we can come in with a stronger hand and make the privilege detention argument like they have at the federal level.
I think maybe if it wasn't their intent originally, that's what it's evolved into, which because there was a lot of, over the last many years, there's been this call for people are innocent until proven guilty. They shouldn't have to pay to post bail. Some people can afford bail, some people cannot. And it's an unjust system. So now everybody should just be let go with no bail. That's really what the goal was. The problem is that you saw failure to appear shoot up, crime shoot up, and no one was being held accountable for their actions. And we saw that in New Jersey. Now, Illinois will talk about how we were the first state to get rid of cash bail. But really, while technically, legally in New Jersey, they haven't eliminated bail bonds, the practice is that they've stopped using bails in probably 98%. There's still people saying that they actually write bail in New Jersey, but it's largely that market has disappeared. But you're seeing all the failure to appears out there and the repercussions of not having a bail system in place. And so I think what has happened when I say it's evolved into this is that now they have people that are committing so many crimes, and to my point earlier, multiple crimes before they've even been prosecuted. And you're getting home detention if you are prosecuted, up to 10 years in home detention and home confinement, if you can believe that. That they've now said they've got these super criminals or super offenders, if you will. And they say, what are we going to do with these people that are offending so often? Well, now they're a risk to public safety. Let's keep them in jail. And then you take the next step further. Then it becomes, okay, well, I got an idea. Why don't we keep the dangerous people in jail, and then we'll just release everybody else? And maybe we'll throw an ankle monitor on them, or we'll have them report to pretrial or something. So you kind of have this low level offender or low risk, then a medium risk. Maybe they get an ankle monitor. And if you're high risk, we'll just keep you in jail pending trial.
But so, it's you don't start off, with committing, armed robberies. I mean, if you're not addressing things, I mean, this, and I know broken windows is a dirty word these days, but it was effective. If you don't get control, or I guess provide deterrence at the lower levels, those things then become higher levels. If we'll just lock up these higher people because it's not like this guy committed murder or anything, and you've heard that all the time. But if you just turn around and churn those people out, they're just on that path to where they get to that point where those crimes will increase over time in violence and severity.
Yes, because there's no resistance to that first criminal act. And then they say, oh, wow, okay, I did this illegal thing and no one did anything to me, or I got arrested, but they let me out right away. They gave me a free attorney. And my case never even went to trial, or I didn't show up to court and no one came find me, or I was on an ankle monitor and I cut it off, or I violated it and no one ever comes and gets me and violates me and puts me back in. So that there's just no structure, and there's no there's nothing where people there's no system in place to hold people accountable. So they just assume, okay, well, I'll just expand my horizons here and start doing other things. To your point, other more serious offenses, and you start stretching out and broadening their criminal behavior. And the surest way to prevent that is to arrest people, prosecute them, and if they're found guilty, you put them in jail for the appropriate period of time. That is the best deterrent to any criminal activity, is prosecuting. And if you're innocent, then you go free. If you're guilty, then you're you're going to get time. And I think that's really what is the nub of it, is that people are not being held accountable. And if they're not held accountable, then they just feel free to do whatever they want to do.
Well, let's talk about the crime numbers a little bit more, because obviously you have the FBI crime numbers that are incomplete. And so if they're incomplete, if you leave out your largest cities, your Los Angeleses and your Chicagos and these cities where there's a great deal of crime, you're going to have those numbers drop down. However, the Bureau of Justice Statistics does an annual review called the National Crime Victims Survey, the NCVS. And it recently came out with its numbers, which indicated that there's been a 40% increase in urban violent crime from 2019 to 2023. And if you exclude simple assault, that number ballooned to a 54% increase. Whereas they were showing that suburban and rural areas did not really see as much of an increase in crime over the same time. So if we're looking at commonalities, what would explain the rapid increase, or in your mind, what would explain the rapid increase in these areas, in these urban areas?
Well, again, they're seeking greener pastures. They're moving out into the, when they, in Chicago, I live in Indianapolis, for those that don't know. Chicago is just right up the road. One of my daughters lives in Wrigley Field, so I get up to Chicago every now and then, or Wrigleyville, next to Wrigley Field. And you start seeing people come out of Chicago down into the Indianapolis area and the suburbs around here to do the things that they're out there doing that they shouldn't be doing. And so they just expand out to greener pastures because, again, now sometimes they run into a buzzsaw. They go into a county to say, we don't play here. We don't do that here in Hamilton County. You come to Dark County, go to Indianapolis if you want to have some fun, but stay out of our county because we're going to arrest you and put you in jail. So you do actually have some counties that are enforcing the law. But I was just noticing and speaking of, on the Safety Act, being that came around in 2021, I think one of the things in hindsight that us as an industry, because Illinois, they haven't had commercial bail bonds, if you will, in Illinois for 60 years. I mean, it's just not, so it's not like saying we've lost a market in the bail industry, because we haven't written bail in that state for decades.
Yeah.
So they largely did cash with the court.
Right.
10% cash to the court, but they were always larger sums. When you think because effectively it was just, they said $100,000 bond in order to get $10,000 cash on a
Right.
So they really eliminated the cash bail, and the cash was generally kept through forfeiture, or they were held for fines and costs. So when that kind of getting off the road a little bit here, the courts really began to rely on that cash that was coming into the bail system. So they were a bit taken aback after 50 years. All of a sudden, they lost their revenue stream from this cash bail. Just a kind of a side side hustle, if you had, in a way that the courts had off the bail system there. But there was nothing bringing these people back to court. So it really wasn't an impact on us. But I think as an industry, we had so many things going on in multiple states, multiple fronts on criminal justice reform. So we weren't able to spend some time talking to legislators in Illinois to say, this is a bad idea. And these are the things that you're going to experience when you pass this. You're going to have increase in crime, increase in failure to appears. You're going to have people, you're going to have jail crowding because you're going to start holding a lot more people in custody, because it becomes an issue for the judge. It's like, okay, wait a minute. I got this in front of me now. A year ago, I would have just let this guy post bail and get out of here. Now I've got to decide, do I have to keep this person in jail? Because if I let him go and they harm somebody, then the question comes, well, we told you he was a threat to public safety. Why'd you let him out? Because now he's let you out and harm somebody. And so I think it's just, we didn't do a good enough. We didn't really put any effort into it. I'm ashamed. I guess I'm ashamed to say, but at the same time, we could only be in so many places at one time. But I think we would have done the citizens of Illinois a favor by getting involved in that discussion and trying to provide the legislators the information that we have as an industry of what the unintended consequences are of passing this legislation, which was challenged. what was it? I don't know, 97 counties in the state challenged the law that were largely outside of Cook County, which is Chicago. And the state Supreme Court upheld it. I mean, they had a temporary restraining order there for a little bit, but ultimately the state Supreme Court approved it and let it go into effect. And I saw something the other day that they've had since the Safety Act was put in place, that they've had 67. This is Cook County, mind you, 67,000 to appears. Domestic murders are up 112%. 387 murders committed by people waiting trial on felonies. And then, of course, murder, sex crimes, aggravated battery, all these things are up because there's just no way to control it when you don't have some type of system in place. And that's really what they did, was they just kind of tossed out the system. Even people that they put on ankle monitors are committing murder and sex crimes and aggravated battery, all this, even when they're on monitors. Because monitors, electronic monitors is kind of a fancy thing out there that people kind of get, oh, this is cool, electronic monitor. But the reality is you have to monitor that person. I mean, when they say monitor, you actually have to monitor that person, and people violate. They have batteries that go dead on them that you have to constantly remind them, and they're on 24 hours a day. And speaking of constitutional challenges, I've always wondered how you can be released on electronic monitor and say that you're actually released from custody when in fact you're being monitored by the state 24/7, 365. How are you can't really regard yourself as being released from custody when you're being tracked. So I've always wondered why that was never been challenged on the constitutionality of that. But I know a lot of people in that business, and they do well in the monitoring business. So I don't want to be too I don't want to hate on them too much, as it were, because they do have their purposes. But if you just totally rely on that in a large way, it's really hard to manage.
Right. Now, but you might I'll get to the 67,000 because there's an op-ed that just came out today that I want to touch on as well. But the experts on this are saying that it's great. The Loyola, I can't pronounce these funny names. Loyola University Center for Criminal Justice basically received a grant for $1.7 million from three different parties, from the National Institute of Justice, which is part of the Department of Justice that doles out money to do studies, but also from $600,000 from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, and $500,000 from the Arnold Foundation to examine how effective the Safety Act has been. Now, it just seems like, especially the MacArthur Foundation and the Arnold Foundation, their fingerprints are on every single piece of anti-bail study that I've ever seen.
They are. They absolutely are. They were in for the pretrial assessment,
Right.
with that, which turned out to more or less be a failure. And their assessment is really what we call underwriting. Determine the flight risk of the individual that you're looking to bond out. So we've been doing that for generations. But the problem is that they don't have anything to back up the bond, if you will, when someone's released on their own recognizance. There's no money guaranteeing or acting as surety to make sure they get back to court, is what we do. But it's interesting what their study is going to find, because as we talked about, if you're underreporting crimes, are they underreporting failure to appears? Have they now, because they know that the failure to appears is a key statistic in whether or not any type of a release program works. So are they starting to call that differently, a failure to appear something differently, like failure to comply, or they just automatically reset court dates if the defendant's not present in order so it doesn't show up that it's a failure to appear, which hurts their statistics. So when you're in control of the data, then it's, then you can do anything with it, unfortunately. So how do you, it'd be interesting to see what they come back with. I'm not optimistic that it'll be fair and balanced on this reporting, but I guess we'll see what they come up with.
Well, I think the early results on that were they're saying there's only like a 3% recidivism rate on the people on bond only committing crime, that the 3% rate. And that doesn't seem to mesh with what we're seeing in just the news, just anecdotally coming out of Chicago.
Well, I guess I would have to know how many people are being released in overall. I don't know that number, and I don't know if the information came out with that. Because if you have 67,000 failure to appears, is that out of, 600,000 releases or a million?
Well,
How many people are being released in order to get the statistics?
evidently what they're doing when you miss court in Cook County is rather than issue a warrant, at least initially, they've decided to issue a notice to appear via postcard that would be sent out by the clerk's office when defendants fail to appear at court hearings.
Yeah.
And these postcards merely provide the time and place of the next scheduled court date, and they're delivered by mail. So they just send them out a postcard saying, "Hey, you missed court. Here's your next court date." I have no idea how many times they do that. I mean, if they do it one time and then issue a warrant, if they do it 10 times, I mean, we're a year in. You've got people, if you miss court, well, we're set your next court date 3 months out. We miss court again, you're 3 months out. Those people technically aren't counting as failures to appear in their system just yet.
That's exactly right.
Because there's no warrants.
Yeah, there's no warrants, there's no FTA of record, which means it's not reflected in the numbers, and you can't really tell. There's no way to accurately tell how many people are showing up for court, which is to my point. They can manipulate that information because they know that's what everyone keys on as to the effectiveness of any type of release program. Now, obviously, in our world, when there's an FTA, they're not sending out a postcard. They're sending out
a bill.
A notice of forfeiture of the bond. And then we have a time certain to produce the defendant. We get them back on calendar. And in many cases, we have to put them back in custody. So we kind of live in the real world of how these things work. And we don't get the benefit of being a government entity where they just can say, well, we're not going to penalize ourselves, so we'll just send you out a notice, and hopefully you should kind of an oops notice. So by the way, did you realize that you had court last Tuesday notice, and you might want to think about making this next court date because we don't have to send out another postcard. So that costs money. So so there's a clear distinction between the government doing something and private.
Well, I'm kind of curious in your thought. I know that in Kansas, about half of our counties are merit selection, half are elected judges. And I know that Illinois, they're all merit selection judges, but Illinois is the only state that has a higher than 50% threshold for retention. I think it's actually, you have to get 60% of the votes for retention. So basically, of all the counties in the country that do merit selection and retention elections, almost all the judges that have been thrown out have been in Illinois because of that higher retention threshold. So, my argument on judicial retention and merit selection has always been you're not really accountable to the people because you never get kicked out. Illinois is a little different because they've got the threshold higher. So I kind of wonder if the judges don't have an incentive to kind of fudge those numbers a little bit. Go, no, I'm doing a great job in this judicial position here.
Yeah, look at the numbers. Yeah. Well, of course, yeah, because they're the ones that dictate whether or not a warrant's going to be issued or whether or not they're resetting the court date. So they have total control over that data. So it's human nature to, I suppose, for some people to protect themselves,
right.
Protect the job.
Well, let's talk about the 67,000 failures to appear. It came out in today's Chicago Tribune, this op-ed that was written by Isis Martinez, who is the outgoing chief clerk of the Cook County Clerk's Office.
Yeah.
Apparently she lost her reelection, so she's now spilling the beans, as it were. But in this editorial, she says, and there's some bullet points here, in the first 50 weeks of the PFA, the Pretrial Fairness Act, out of 90,872 cases, so about 91,000 cases, defendants missed court 67,416 times. And this includes defendants charged with violent felonies. Okay, the second bullet point was, and so that's 67,000 out of 97 or 90,000. If I'm doing my math really quick, that's like a 66% failure to appear rate.
Yes. Okay.
Which fits with what we've seen in other sorts of lenient release systems, emergency release, what we've seen in Harris County, those sorts of things where you just let people go. It makes more sense that that's a more accurate number given what's happened other places in the country. Now, the second bullet point is that there are currently 31,393 active warrants for arrest in Cook County. And those include cases that were done before the Pretrial Fairness Act. The chief judge has a PFA dashboard that is shared with the public. So this is the data that they're giving out to the public. It only considers warrants as failure to appear events and not the postcard notifications sent after the defendant fails to appear in court. And the dashboard only uses a subset of the total number of cases in Cook County. So they're just doing a sampling of this.
Yes.
And then the final bullet point she put in there is that there are pretrial assessments administered at bond court, which provide judges with information on whether to release defendants after an arrest. They're not being updated properly to reflect failure to appear events. So even the things that they count as failure to appear events, i.e. the warrants, so you apparently missed court enough times or the case is egregious enough to issue a warrant, when they get you back in there and make a determination about what to do with you the next time around, that failure to appear, that warrant's not being included in the assessment that they're supposed to make.
I guess we need to find out who they're buying their postcards from, and we can determine how many people are planning to appear by how many postcards they're buying. I guess. I mean, it's how do you fight against that? I mean, how do you get the information from the courts, through a FOIA request or something, and try to piece together what the real story is? It's very difficult, and they know it's difficult. It's been difficult to get it out of, say, New Jersey, for instance. It's just tough it's difficult to get it out of here in Indiana, where we've tried. It's just not easy. So I guess what I'm saying is it makes it easy for them to fudge the numbers because they know it's difficult to check. But it's really dishonest, which is interesting because they're in the justice system. So
well, I guess I was angling for a different answer on a question earlier when I was asking the commonalities between these urban areas that have had these increases in crime. Mm-hmm. One thing that I looked at several years ago during the height of bail reform is you looked at all these cities that were in like the top 15, 20 cities as far as murder rates. And all of those cities had done some sort of bail reform. I mean, there's two of them in Missouri, which is right across state line from me. Both Kansas City and St. Louis were high up on those numbers. And they both had done, lenient release policies. Several of the other cities had done the same thing. But a lot of these cities also have elected what we kind of loosely refer to as Soros prosecutors or, hyper progressive prosecutors that have chosen either not to charge crimes or to let people go on a more regular basis. Are you seeing that in some of these areas as well, where you have agents across the country where a more lenient prosecutor is then causing additional increases in crime in their city?
Oh, of course. Indianapolis is one. Los Angeles is one of note. They're trying to oust the prosecutor out there for basically laying down and not adding gang enhancements to murders and gang charges. And because they don't prosecute certain charges, and then they slow down the process for prosecution. They argue against setting bail. And it's a problem. And hopefully with this upcoming election, maybe the people will speak and we'll start seeing a shift to electing prosecutors that are actually want to prosecute and do their jobs and protect the citizens in their communities. And hopefully we'll start seeing the pendulum swing back to prosecutors doing what they do, which is we're supposed to do, which is prosecute. So that is a common theme to, I think, and it also seems to be centered around, obviously, the big, large populated areas. And it's almost an epidemic, unfortunately, and hopefully we'll get that under control. But I think it's really going to come down to the elections to get that done.
Well, that might also explain, or at least provide some clue as to why you saw this huge uptick in these crimes in urban areas that have these progressive prosecutors, and you didn't see a corresponding rise in suburban and rural areas where they haven't really drank the Kool-Aid of this progressive prosecution.
Well, again, it really kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier when people would come down from Chicago into the Indianapolis area. They would know don't go into, say, Hamilton County or some of these more rural counties because they were enforcing the law. They would prosecute you. So they migrate to those areas where they, the kind of the word is out that you can pretty much get away with most anything in some of these populated areas. But there are some sheriffs and prosecutors out there that are keeping up the good fight and doing really what they're hired to do, which is enforce the law and then prosecute those that are charged with the crime. And we just, unfortunately, that seems to be more and more being pushed out to the suburbs,
Right.
and away from the larger cities, the larger populations, and um, and that's unfortunate because I've got a daughter who lives in Brooklyn, I've got one that lives in Chicago, and that's always at the back of my mind: is there safety in those large populated areas that are where you have prosecutors in those particular areas that do not enforce the law, and that's disconcerting.
Well, that's the political phrase, the "Don't California my Texas" phrase. You have all these people that have fled these areas because of crime and other issues that they've left those areas. They've moved to, I guess, red states or areas that don't have the same crime level and the same taxing and regulation that they have, and then they come here and vote for the same candidates that did the same thing in the states they just left.
Yes, and they bring their state with them and their policies, and I mean, that's just how it is these days. I don't know how you prevent that. If when you have a mind to do something like that, you have a mind to do it, and I don't know why people think that. I'm personally in favor of protecting my family and my property. I like to know that someone just doesn't feel like they can come and take either one of them without any repercussions. But I think when we were talking about the warrant, 67,000 out of 90 cases, there's just word gets out that you don't have to go to court. Word gets
Right.
out that, if you're on a monitor, that they're not going to come get you if you violate. And word gets around. And if not from personal experience, or you're just talking to other people that are dealing with the same situation you have, and it just kind of compounds itself, and it just gets out of control. And it's like, why go to court? They don't. No one else is going to court, so why should I be the one to go to court? Or so it just feeds off of itself, and it just really takes somebody that's going to come in and really, it just takes a few examples, honestly, to say we're not going to. You see about in these cities where they have these cars that I don't even know what they call them, but they come in and they turn, make these big circles and intersections and just do burnouts and all this stuff, and it's like, how is that even happening? How is that being allowed to happen? Where's law enforcement? Well, law enforcement will say, we don't have the manpower. We don't have the staff to protect the city and then deal with all these little fires. I mean, they're trying. They're doing that in Indianapolis. They're trying to deal with that. But our law enforcement here will say that they need 1,500 to 2,000 officers on our police force here in Indianapolis. That's how degraded the force has become. Because of bad press and reforms, and people saying, I don't want to be in a position where I might get sued if I'm out there doing my job and fired and put in jail. And so it's hurt, and all that just kind of comes together to some mosaic of a broken system between failure to prosecute, failure to arrest, low law enforcement, staffing, and again, getting back to Illinois and the Safety Act and the preventative detention. I think all these problems have fed into that. They've got an effort here in Indiana, next door to Illinois. They passed legislation on it the first time. You have to pass it twice in order to get the state constitution amended. They're trying to amend language on a preventative detention, which in the state constitution says treason and capital murder are the only one.
Right.
You cannot you hold something. Okay, fine. Maybe that's way too narrow. Maybe we could expand that a little bit. But they're wanting to expand it to everybody that's charged with a crime. And I believe, if I have my date right, it was 1840 that the Constitution was put here in Indiana that has the language. So however many years, 180 years later, now is the time that they want to expand it. What has happened in 180 years that now is the time that we need to expand preventative detention in Indiana? Well, what's happened is the last several years of bail reform and criminal justice reform and the policies that in our state, which is a Republican state, we got a supermajority here in Indiana. So they've bought into it as well, which you'd think that they would be tough on crime. And there's been some policies here that you might question. But now they've kind of created the problem that we're in, where they feel like the only way we can control the crime and these repeat offenders is by keeping them in jail. Okay, so now the people that were saying no bail, you shouldn't have to post bail, now they're going to be fighting the fact that you're not getting any bail. You're going to sit in jail. So where are those people now that were saying that you shouldn't have to post bail to now you haven't been convicted of anything, and now you're sitting in jail 6 months to a year and then who pays for all that? They built a brand new justice center here in Indianapolis a couple of years ago and didn't even add any bed space. I assume because they thought there were programs that were in place that, well, we can control these people outside the jail, that they didn't feel the need to add any more bed space for a growing city. I mean, that's the logic that we have here and the thinking that we have. It lacks common sense, some of the policies. So I think that's what feeds into these, particularly the preventive detention. There's no rhyme or reason of why you want to just eliminate a bail system. That makes no sense to me whatsoever, and it never has, to have any meaningful system in place to make sure people show up to court. It totally disregards victims. It totally disregards society. I mean, don't these legislators have families? Don't they have people in the community that they like, and their constituents? I mean, who are they looking out for here? Who's the big winner here? The person that's charged with committing the crimes. They're the big winner. They don't have to pay for an attorney. They get a free attorney. They don't have to pay for bail. And then no one's coming to get them if they don't show up to court. Meanwhile, the victims of crime and society suffers.
Well, one of the arguments that I've tried to make is the presumption of innocence is not an argument against bail. The presumption of innocence is why there's bail in the first place. If you are not presumed innocent, why shouldn't the state simply be able to just lock you up for the duration of whatever process they're going to give you to get you from arrest to conviction? If you're not presumed innocent, why shouldn't we be able to? I mean, that's what several other countries do. France, England, at this point in time, they'll lock you up and you can stay in custody for the duration if they so choose.
Well, people are arrested on probable cause of having committed the crime, right? And then they're arraigned, and then the judge is supposed to factor in the seriousness of the offense, the risk of flight, prior arrest, convictions, victims involved in setting bail. Generally, each state has different things they can apply, and then they set appropriate bail, not excessive bail, but appropriate bail to ensure the person comes to court. And to your point, that allows them to be released pending trial, to go back to work with their attorney and prepare for the defense. And that's the process. That's what keeps everybody honest. And then a third party, at least when we're involved, a third party steps up to vouch for that individual and say, I will be the other eyes and ears, and I'll put my money on the line to make sure my son or daughter or friend goes to court. So they've got skin in the game, as we like to say, in addition to the bail agent. And they're watching the individuals really probably closer than the bail agent can, because they're in their lives and they're out with them all the time. They see them all the time. But they're willing to stand up and vouch for the individuals. Those that, when we talk about people sitting in jail that can't afford bail, as we know, many of those times that individual has burned all their bridges with their family friends because they've been arrested multiple times, or they just will not correct their bad behavior. And people have just say, well, I've helped you all I can. Your bail is affordable. I could help you if I chose to, but I'm not going to help you because you're just not correcting your behavior. And I don't want to invest in you anymore to try to help you out.
Or I don't want you to die of a drug overdose when I get you back out again.
I don't want you to, or I don't want you to hurt my dog, your wife or something. You're right. There's extenuating circumstances. It's not always because money, because as we know that, it's not always about how much the money the defendant has in their pocket or have access to. It's the people around them that usually come to post their bail. So when you talk about indigency, it can't stop at what the person has in their wallet. It's who your contacts, who's willing to come and help you and assist you in this situation that you found yourself in. So I think, unfortunately, we beat back preventive detention in a few states. Texas, Ohio, and Connecticut, and Delaware looks like it's probably going to pass. So several states have adopted this thinking, and it's Democrats and Republicans, mind you, that have adopted this thinking that we need to be able to keep people in jail until trial. And again, if you just narrow that down to the most serious offenses that they're charged with, that there's some probable cause of evidence for keeping this individual in jail, that makes sense to me as just someone lives in my community, my kids are in the community. There's some people that I would say, I don't want that person out to jail. Holy cow, the charges that he's charged with and what he's done. But by and large, most of the charges that we found in our careers, which we've both been doing this for several decades, that, you get them out, get them an attorney, and they go through the process and we get them back to court. I think just the reforms have really had what some would call unintended consequences. We would call known consequences for just really laying down, if you will, and letting people do whatever they want to do. And I think that's had some major consequences to the point where courts have to hide the numbers because they're so bad that they have no choice, because people would say, why in the heck are we doing this if this is the problem that's created? Which is why you see them finding other ways to keep the numbers down. And they just rename it.
Right.
They put another
redefine it, give some other, got to miss court 3 times before we issue a warrant, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And they don't issue the warrant. Yeah, like you said, they 3 times, and that doesn't make him any less violent. If they were violent offenders to begin with, by not issuing the warrant, it probably even, if you think about it, 67,000 failure to appear, just the ones that we know about. Those people are out in the communities that a law enforcement officer might be pulling over for speeding or stopping, and they have active warrants out for them. I mean, the danger to law enforcement by allowing people to continue to go out and commit crimes without being held accountable, in addition to the citizens, I think is usually understated how much exposure that they have when there's so many people with outstanding warrants, felony warrants on serious charges, are out and about roaming around.
Or people that have missed court and think they have warrants. And so they're going to potentially react to law enforcement like they have a warrant. When law enforcement's running that tag to the computer and come back, oh, no, we're not showing anything here. And they walk up thinking this is just average Joe citizen. But average Joe citizen thinks that he's got this felony warrant and he's going to respond like he's going to jail. That may be, and the police aren't necessarily prepared for that.
Yeah, because they know they've been blowing off court and not going. And as far as they're concerned, they can consider themselves on the run,
Right.
A fugitive at large, if you will. You're right. That's exactly right. That's a good point. I agree.
Well, let's take one last slam at Chicago here. Earlier this month, because this data is all coming out here recently, on the website illinoispolicy.org, an author, Patrick Andreessen, wrote an article titled "Chicago Violent Crime Hits 5-Year High." And in that article, he takes data from Chicago police data and shows that violent crimes for each of the 12-month periods ending in August of this year, basically you did ending in August so he could have 12-month comparisons. From 2020 to 2024, the number of violent crimes in Chicago or in Cook County rose from 25,000 events to almost 30,000 events, while arrests for the same events fell from 4,300 to 3,862. And that doesn't sound like success.
No, that sounds like we're giving up. We're just going to stop. It gets a bit demoralizing to law enforcement when they apprehend someone or catch them, whether they're on a warrant or they're called to arrest someone after they just committed a crime, and they put them in jail, and they're right back out on the street again doing the same thing over and over again, and it's just not to be cliche, but the revolving door. I mean, that's exactly what it is. I mean, there's hardly a better description for it, and they just keep saying the same thing over and over again. And I think you kind of see that with prosecutors. And public defenders just like, great. 10 of my people didn't show up. That's 10 less cases I have to mess with. So I've got all these other cases that are pending that I have to be in court on. And so if I have 20% fewer cases that I can count on not showing up to court, that's 20% less I have to deal with. So I think you just kind of it becomes a new norm. And they adjust everything to it. How much staff that they have to deal with the cases, and how many public defenders and so forth, and prosecutors, because they know, well, I know there's 100 cases, but only 80 of them show up to court, so we can adjust it, everything accordingly. And so they just kind of get used to it, and they probably get a bit cynical. It's like, I know there's always going to be another 10 more, even if those 10 didn't show up, there's going to be 10 new ones tomorrow. So.
Well, and I think they rationalize it, the judges especially on this, where they sit there and go, well, yeah, he was gone for 2 years, but that means that was 2 years he wasn't getting in trouble. It's like, you don't know that.
Yeah.
That's 2 years he didn't get caught. That doesn't mean he's not out committing crimes during that 2 years.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's, I think the system that they felt like they had to fix is probably more broken than ever in many states. And I think Illinois and New Jersey, for instance, and you could actually throw New Mexico in there while you're at it, are probably as broke as they get in terms of their system, and they've convinced themselves somehow that it's working. The people that back that system, and you kind of have to figure out what is in it for them to think that system is working. Why is it they have to believe that this system is working? How do they, I guess, for lack of a better word, profit from a broken system like that? I don't.
Well, I think there's some ideological stuff on that. Now, I want to take my final swipe at Illinois here, and Illinois is a large state and it borders several other states, including, like you said, your home state of Indiana. It also borders Missouri, which is a border state to here. I know that when Kansas City, Missouri implemented their version of bail reform, where they started letting a lot of people go, and they had to make specific findings to hold people in custody. Those of us on the Kansas side saw immediate impact, including a number of high-profile murders committed by people who have been recently released without bail in Kansas City, Missouri. I know there was a triple murder that happened in Kansas City, Kansas. That person had been released a week earlier in Kansas City, Missouri. That was right before COVID came along. And so the Missouri legislature had prepared legislation to deal with that. And then COVID came along, and then, it sort of got lost in the weeds. But you have agents all over the country. I mean, what sort of bleed over are you seeing in places like Gary, Indiana, St. Louis, and the Quad Cities in Iowa? I mean, those are cities that share borders with Illinois. Are we seeing upticks in crime and bail related issues in those cities, or the people that your people bond out? That, because I would think that it would be an awfully tough business model to work in, say the Quad Cities, when if a person misses court, they just have to cross the river, and then you can't physically go pick them up. And if they know that Illinois is not going to do anything, how does that affect the people that are working in the bondsmen working in those areas in, say, Iowa or St. Louis area?
Well, we're uniquely positioned that we have Kentucky to the south of us. We have Illinois to the west. Both states, outlaw bounty hunting and recovery, but you do have some people that manage to at least work with law enforcement, and they'll do skip chasing and work with law enforcement to have them picked up. And obviously that works better out in the suburbs, because especially if they don't want someone else's problems. It's like, fine, come get your Hoosier and come get them and take them back to Indiana. We've got enough of our problems over here. But I mean, that's obviously going to have create difficulties for those neighboring states and counties, like you have there in between KCMO and KCKS, as they say in your area. I was born in Kansas City, so
there we go.
So I have a little bit of connections there. Go Chiefs, by the way, and the Royals for that matter.
It's a good time right now.
Yeah, it's a good time to have them on TV. But so that's what I've seen. I'll leave you with this as we come to a close here. What I've seen is that across the country, we've seen a disappearance of the misdemeanor market. Okay. We've seen more serious felonies. We've seen defendants that have multiple cases pending while they're being charged with a new case. all due to having extended case periods from up to 2 years in many cases. And I think that creates, it, to me, that's more reflective of the broken system than any fake numbers that they want to put out there on the failure to appears and the crime statistics. That what's the reality? And that's the reality if you're a bail agent, the type of individual. Obviously, you still get first timers and so forth. But I think what going all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, when it used to be you would be arrested for DWI and you'd stay the night and they might charge you with also failure to maintain a single lane and no insurance and all these other Class C misdemeanors that go on top of it. And you'd have to call mom and dad to come get you and you have to hire an attorney to deal with your case and you'd have a bail agent making sure you go to court. You'd have all these things to really to memorialize the experience and say, holy cow. That was exhausting. That took me so much money, so much of my time. I got my license suspended. That cost me more money. I had to get SR-22 for my insurance. And I had to do all these things. I'm never going to do that again. You're kind of a scared straight moment with regard to just being arrested. They don't have that so much anymore. It's if they take you in at all on the misdemeanors, they're going to be released almost immediately. In many cases, you're not going to be required to post bail. And so, again, you don't have that scared straight moment to say, okay, that's not good. I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to put my family through it again. I'm embarrassed. I'm humiliated. And I can't go to that. I can't afford it to go through that again. And I think that's what we've lost in kind of the shame of being arrested that first time and the humiliation and along with the cost. And I think that's what the system lacks anymore is that they don't, it's not a memorable experience the first time, and they don't put you kind of go through hell for a little bit for just making a bad decision. And unfortunately that's not there anymore. I think that's plays a larger role than people realize.
Well, you lose the social deterrence here. Well, let me throw my tinfoil hat theories out here, and then we'll get out of here. Prior to George Floyd, we were getting all sorts of anti-bail rhetoric. I mean, Mike Brown's death and the resulting riots in St. Louis had nothing to do with bail. But the anti-bail people hitched their wagon to that event and pointed out that the Ferguson, Missouri Municipal Court used a lot of cash bail for revenue generation, as municipal courts tend to do, which had nothing to do with Mike Brown committing a strong arm robbery. However, it was somehow indicative of the relationship with police in Ferguson.
Mm-hmm.
But within 2 years, the big social media and search engine companies, Facebook, Google, Bing, had all banned bail bond advertising on their platforms. We can't buy Google AdWords.
Mm-hmm.
However, in the immediate aftermath of George Floyd, all those bail reform cries were replaced with defund the police. We need to get rid of police here, And so, like I said, it's tinfoil. But it's been my opinion that these people that are really pushing this, for whatever reason, they want to really break the criminal justice system, and bail is just the easiest target because most people don't really understand it. I'm curious, how far in the weeds am I? How much tinfoil am I wearing? What are your opinions on that theory?
I don't think you're far in the weeds. I think we tend to be we tend to make the top of that list of being targeted because we're the private sector. We, bail bond companies, if they do it right, it's a business, so hopefully it's a profitable business. And many of them have backing from insurance companies, and everybody perceives that the big insurance companies are, on Wall Street and up in Manhattan, New York or whatever, and that we just have all this money and we're just profiting off the woes of individuals that just made a bad decision. And when the reality is that we're actually providing assistance and a pathway for someone to be released from custody pending trial without having to put up the full amount of the bail that the judge has deemed necessary to assure you get back to court. And so we provide that service, and we're in the decarceration business, as someone once said, not the incarceration business. So we're all about getting people out of jail and helping them, but we have a process, and that requires family and friends to get involved with the process and someone to vouch for you. So to me, I think that's probably has a lot to do with why they're targeting us, just to make us the bad guy because we're human beings, and then law enforcement. They've always, for years and years, someone's been out there, saying law enforcement is too aggressive or what have you. But I think that's it. I think that we're just a private sector component of the criminal justice system, one of the few, if not the only, other than private attorneys and whoever fills the vending machines at the jail, I guess. But we're just one of the few private components. I imagine public officials, judges, and government, they probably don't like the fact that there's a private sector component. That's why they like keeping that cash. They like using it to pay fines and costs. And sometimes they get like in Indiana and Illinois, Kentucky, Wisconsin, they get kind of hooked on that cash coming in. It's like, wow, this is just free money. We don't have to do anything. If people don't show up to court, we're not really spending money on, it's not like we're hiring more fugitive people to add to the fugitive squad with law enforcement to get these people back in court. That's not where they're spending their money. So it's just they're using that money for other things. So they've seen the revenue source, and I think if they get us out of the picture, then that's just that much more money for them. But the problem is that we charge a fee, just assume a financial risk, and that's what we charge our fee, and then we're held accountable to make sure people get to court, and the case can proceed, and everybody else can do their job, and the victims can get justice. So somehow that makes us a target.
Well, I mean, some of the same things. I mean, basically not allowing us to advertise. I mean, that's a form of censorship. And then we saw during COVID and all the things that came from that, COVID, elections, everything else, we saw these same social media companies engaged in additional forms of censorship. I just, kind of wonder if the things that were happening to us were not just preludes to the things that were happening to society as a whole.
Well, it probably is, because I think that's the ideology of the people running those companies.
Right.
Somehow they think that they don't want to be seen as helping these businesses that somehow people are offended by. I guess that's we have banks that won't give us credit cards, or bonding companies' credit cards. American Express comes to mind, or not to name drop too many companies. I don't want to cancel my personal American Express, but basically because I use it all the time. But yeah, we get targeted for that. It's just a kind of a bizarre thing. We're just out here doing the business and providing a service, and we feel like we're helping people in a tough situation. And again, you can't keep everybody in jail as much as you would like to, and say everybody's a bad guy because you've been charged with a crime yet where you've not even been convicted. Now, sometimes the evidence appears overwhelming. They got you the videotape with the shotgun in the liquor store. I think we've got you.
Right.
Though you certainly have those situations, but still, everybody has an opportunity to defend themselves. And we just, it's a constitutional right, and we just assist them with that constitutional right to be free on bail pending trial. And we're just out here doing our jobs.
Well, hopefully we'll start to see some real numbers maybe at some point in time come out of Illinois. I don't know how soon that might occur. And I mean, it seems like that people involved have a vested interest in covering that up, but maybe we'll see something in the future.
Well, we just have to get them to say a postcard. It's anonymous with a failure to appear. And when we could do that, we might actually get some real numbers. Let's hope that turns out to be true.
Well, let's hope so. Mike, thank you very much for coming on the podcast again. I really appreciate you talking about this. I do think it's a critical issue, because I think there's a proselytizing group of people that are going to try and push this further down the road. So any sort of pushback we can provide is at least get some truth out there is good for the society as a whole and the industries in particular.
Indeed. Thanks for having me on, Sean. Shane, you can call me anytime.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Mike.
Care.
We would like to thank our guest, Mike Whitlock, for taking the time to speak with us today. It's disturbing that the very officials who pushed for these legal changes appear to be trying to suppress the data showing that it was a poor idea in the first place. Thomas Sowell once said, "When you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear." And obviously the people of Illinois want to hear that crime's going down, even if it's not. It doesn't sound like the officials in Illinois are telling us the truth about the Safety Act. But we hope you'll join us for the next episode of the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we'll continue to bring you critical information and truth and conversations with people involved in the criminal justice system.
Join us again next time for the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolfe and executive produced by David Stuckman.